They told me my husband was gone forever. I watched my 9-year-old granddaughter Lily knock on his coffin every day, begging him to come back. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. Every morning in our tiny, worn apartment in the Bronx, I wake up with a weight pressing down on my chest like a stone. The faded wallpaper peels at the corners where the heating pipes have leaked for years, creating those brown stains that remind me of tears. The constant hum of the city seeps through the thin windows. Sirens, car horns, the elevated train that shakes our building every 12 minutes. The cold smell of cement from the streets below mixes with old memories that cling to every piece of furniture in this place. My name is Margaret, and at 75 years old, I thought I had seen everything life could throw at me. But nothing prepared me for what happened after my husband Thomas passed away 6 months ago. Nothing prepared me for watching my own granddaughter, sweet little Lily, knock on that mahogany coffin with her tiny fists, whispering, "Grandpa, please wake up," over and over until her knuckles turned red. My days blur into one another now, navigating the exhausting routine of meager grocery runs on my fixed Social Security income, managing Lily's homework while her parents work their demanding jobs in Manhattan, and dodging the thinly veiled resentment of the rest of my family. They see me as a burden now, a tired old woman who can't keep up, who asks too many questions, who needs too much help. Just last week, I held my breath, hoping my eldest daughter Sandra would call to invite me over for what should have been Lily's 10th birthday party. The phone rang at exactly 3 o'clock, just like it always does when Sandra has something important to discuss. But this time, her voice was different, cold, distant. "Mom, about Lily's party tomorrow," she said, and I could already hear the disappointment coming. "We're going to have to cancel your invitation. There's just too much going on right now. You understand, don't you?" The sting was sharp, sharper than the winter wind that cuts through these Bronx streets. Another reminder that after all these years of sacrifice, of giving everything I had to this family, I had become invisible, expendable, a ghost haunting their celebrations. I remember the smell of Thomas's old cologne, Brut by Fabergé, still lingering on the nightstand where he kept his reading glasses and his worn leather wallet. The photo frames on our dresser are cracked now, knocked over during one of Lily's desperate tantrums when she couldn't understand why Grandpa wouldn't wake up from his long sleep. These frames hold pictures of better times. Our wedding day 47 years ago in a small church in Queens, family vacations to Coney Island when the children were young, Christmas mornings when our modest living room overflowed with laughter and wrapping paper. I'm haunted by the contrast between those sunlit days filled with Thomas's booming laughter and the gloomy silence that wears down my home now like water eroding stone. The apartment feels smaller without his presence, even though he wasn't a big man. At 5'8", with gentle brown eyes and hands that always smelled like the machine oil from his job at the subway maintenance yard, Thomas had a way of filling any room with warmth. And yet, even in death, he continues to work miracles through the faith of a child. Little Lily keeps knocking on that coffin during our weekly visits to Woodlawn Cemetery, as though her tiny hands alone could wake him from whatever dream holds him now. She brings him drawings, tells him about school, asks him to help her with math problems. The funeral director, Mr. Peterson, has grown accustomed to our Sunday visits. He nods kindly when Lily approaches the casket during the brief moments when the funeral home allows family viewings. "Grandma," Lily whispered to me just 3 days ago, her small hand tugging at my coat sleeve. "Why doesn't Grandpa answer when I knock? I know he can hear me." How do you explain death to a child who believes love can conquer everything? How do you tell her that sometimes the people we need most leave us when we're not ready to let them go? But let me go back to the beginning, because Lily's story, our story, didn't start with Thomas's death. It started years earlier, with a pattern of sacrifice that would shape everything that followed. I gave everything to this family, everything. For 47 years, I was Thomas's devoted wife, working double shifts as a registered nurse at Bronx Lebanon Hospital, while he put in his 8 hours maintaining the subway cars that kept New York moving. When Thomas developed diabetes in his 50s, I managed his medications, his diet, his doctor appointments. When he had his first heart attack at 62, I nursed him through the recovery, learning to use the glucose monitor, counting carbs, making sure he took his blood pressure pills every morning with his coffee. "Margaret, you're wearing yourself out," he used to tell me when he caught me falling asleep at the kitchen table after a 16-hour shift at the hospital. But what choice did I have? His health insurance barely covered the medications. Someone had to work. Someone had to keep the lights on and food on the table. When Sandra got pregnant with Lily at 28 and her husband left her 6 months later, who do you think stepped in? When my son Michael lost his job during the 2008 financial crisis and couldn't make his rent, who do you think emptied her savings account to help? When my youngest daughter Patricia needed money for her wedding, Who do you think took out a loan against our small retirement fund? For decades, I was the safety net, the problem solver, the woman who said yes when everyone else said no. Mom, you don't understand how expensive things are now, Sandra would say when I'd gently suggest that maybe, just maybe, she could contribute something toward Lily's care during the weeks when the little girl stayed with us. The cold silence that followed those conversations was worse than any words. It told me everything I needed to know about how my family saw me, not as a person with needs and limits, but as a resource to be tapped whenever convenient. There were all those nights I stayed awake worrying about bills instead of sleeping, calculating and recalculating whether we'd have enough money for both groceries and Thomas's heart medication. Yet somehow I was still expected to cook perfect Sunday dinners, help with homework, referee sibling arguments, and pretend everything was fine. The weight of being everyone's solution while having no one to solve my own problems slowly crushed something inside me. "You're too sensitive, Mom," my son Michael sneered at me once during a particularly heated argument about money. He wanted me to co-sign for another loan, his third request that year. When I hesitated, when I dared to suggest that maybe he should look at his spending habits, he turned on me like I was the enemy. "You act like we're trying to bleed you dry or something. We're family. This is what families do." But families, I was learning, aren't supposed to be one-sided bank accounts. They're not supposed to leave you feeling empty and used and questioning your own worth. I started to wonder if I was just a resource to them, a convenient grandmother-shaped punching bag where they could dump their frustrations, their financial problems, their parenting responsibilities. Was my heart so worn down by years of giving that I couldn't even recognize when I was being taken advantage of? When Thomas got sick, really sick, during his final months, something shifted in the family dynamic. Suddenly, visiting our apartment became an inconvenience. Phone calls became shorter. Invitations to family gatherings grew rare. "It's just so depressing, Mom," Patricia said when I asked why she hadn't been by to see her father in over a month. "He doesn't even remember half the things we talk about anymore." Thomas was dying slowly, his memory fading like an old photograph left in the sun. But he was still my husband. He was still their father. He still deserved love and dignity and the presence of his family during his final chapter. Instead, it fell to me and little Lily to be his primary companions. Lily, bless her heart, would climb into his lap and read to him from her picture books. She'd show him her school projects, tell him elaborate stories about her imaginary friend Amanda, ask him to help her color inside the lines. Even when he forgot her name sometimes, even when he'd call her by Sandra's name or look at her with confusion clouding his eyes, Lily never gave up on him. "Grandpa's just tired, Grandma," she'd whisper to me when Thomas would fall asleep mid-conversation. "He'll remember tomorrow." Such faith, such pure, unwavering faith from a child who hadn't yet learned that love doesn't always conquer everything, that sometimes people leave us no matter how tightly we hold on. The final months were a blur of hospital visits, insurance paperwork, and medication schedules. I was exhausted, mentally and physically drained from juggling Thomas's care with my responsibilities to Lily and the minimal help I received from my own children. Sandra would drop Lily off at our apartment 3 or 4 days a week, claiming she needed the babysitting help because childcare was so expensive. But when I asked for help with Thomas, just someone to sit with him while I ran to the pharmacy or grocery store, suddenly everyone was too busy. "Can't Michael help?" Sandra would say. "Can't Patricia take a shift?" Always deflecting, always pointing to someone else's responsibility. When Thomas finally passed on a cold Tuesday morning in February, I felt something break inside me that I didn't think could be repaired. But what happened next, the way my family responded to his death, shattered whatever was left of my naive belief that blood always takes care of blood. The funeral arrangements became a nightmare of competing opinions and hidden agendas. Michael wanted the cheapest possible service. Patricia insisted we needed flowers that cost more than our monthly grocery budget. Sandra took charge of writing the obituary without consulting me, making decisions about what music would be played, what prayers would be said, who would speak at the service. "Mom, you're too emotional right now to make these kinds of decisions," she said, when I tried to suggest that maybe, as Thomas's wife of 47 years, I should have some input into how we celebrated his life. Too emotional. As if grief was a character flaw. As if mourning my husband made me incapable of rational thought. But the real blow came when I discovered they had been making plans for after the funeral. Plans that didn't include me. "We think it would be best if Lily came to stay with me permanently," Sandra announced during the reception at our apartment. "You're going to need time to adjust, and taking care of a 9-year-old is probably too much for you right now." Too much for me. The woman who had been caring for Lily several days a week for years. The woman who knew her homework schedule, her favorite bedtime stories, her fears about the monster under the bed, and her dreams of becoming a veterinarian when she grew up. But I want to stay with Grandma, Lily said in her small, clear voice. Grandpa might come back, and if I'm not here, he won't know where to find me. Even my granddaughter understood something my own children had forgotten, that home isn't just a place, it's where love lives. It's where memories are treasured instead of discarded. That's when Lily started her ritual of knocking on Thomas's coffin. Every Sunday, we would take the bus to Woodlawn Cemetery, walking the 15 minutes from the bus stop through the gates and past the elaborate mausoleums built by families with more money than we ever dreamed of having. Thomas's grave is in a modest section under a small oak tree, marked by a simple headstone with his name, dates, and the words, "Beloved husband and father." Words I insisted on, despite Michael's complaints about the additional cost per letter. Lily would kneel beside the grave and knock gently on the earth, the same rhythmic pattern she used when asking to come into our bedroom for comfort after a bad dream. "Grandpa, it's me, Lily. Can you hear me in there? I brought you a new picture." Then she'd pull out whatever artwork she'd created that week, crayon drawings of our family, construction paper flowers, math worksheets with gold star stickers that she wanted to share with him. She'd place these treasures on his headstone, carefully arranging them like offerings, like prayers made manifest through a child's hands. "Grandma says you're sleeping, but I know you can hear me," she'd continue, her voice carrying the absolute certainty that only children possess. "I need you to wake up. Mommy says I have to come live with her all the time now, and I don't want to leave our apartment. That's where you and Grandma and me watch cartoons together. That's where you taught me to make pancakes. That's where all our memories live." Watching her pour her heart out to cold earth and marble nearly broke what was left of mine. But there was something beautiful in her faith, too. Something that reminded me why I'd fought so hard to keep our little family together through poverty, illness, and now grief. The cemetery visits became our sacred time together. Just Lily and me and the memory of Thomas. Mr. Peterson, the funeral director, had become an unexpected ally in preserving these moments. He was a kind man in his 60s who had worked in funeral service for over 30 years, and he seemed to understand that grief has its own timeline, its own rituals that don't always follow conventional rules. "Mrs. Chen," he said to me one Sunday afternoon as we were preparing to leave, "I hope you know that what you're doing for that little girl, honoring her need to stay connected to her grandfather, that's a precious gift. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." His words felt like absolution, like permission to trust my instincts about what Lily needed during this devastating transition. But my family saw things differently. Sandra grew increasingly impatient with what she called Lily's unhealthy fixation on Thomas's death. "She needs to move on, Mom. Kids are resilient. The longer you encourage this fantasy that he's somehow still alive in that coffin, the harder it's going to be for her to accept reality. Accept reality. As if accepting meant forgetting. As if healing required abandoning love. The tension came to a head during what should have been a routine family dinner at Sandra's apartment in Manhattan. She had finally invited me to join them for Sunday dinner, the first invitation I'd received since Thomas's funeral, and I was hopeful that maybe we were starting to heal some of the divisions that had opened between us. The apartment Sandra shared with her boyfriend Derek was everything our Bronx home wasn't. Modern, spacious, filled with expensive furniture and art. It spoke of investment portfolios and stock dividends, of a comfortable life built on dual incomes and careful financial planning, the kind of wealth that comes from having good jobs and no unexpected medical emergencies, no elderly parents draining your savings for heart medications and hospital copays. "This is beautiful," I said, admiring a painting in their living room that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. "Derek's bonus from the stock market last year," Sandra said casually, as if mentioning they'd bought groceries. "He's got a real gift for knowing when to buy and sell. We've made a small fortune investing in Bitcoin and some tech companies." The ease with which she mentioned their financial success stung. Here was my daughter, talking about fortunes and bonuses, while I clipped coupons and counted pennies for bus fare to visit her father's grave. During dinner, the conversation inevitably turned to Lily and her future living arrangements. "I've been thinking," Sandra said, cutting her salmon with surgical precision, "maybe it would be better if Lily didn't visit the cemetery so often. Dr. Martinez thinks it might be preventing her from processing her grief in a healthy way." Dr. R. Martinez was the child psychologist Sandra had started taking Lily to see, another professional opinion to validate what the family had already decided, that my influence on my granddaughter was somehow damaging. "She's not processing anything unhealthy," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "She's mourning her grandfather. She loved him, and she's trying to understand why he's gone. By talking to a coffin mom, by believing he can hear her. That's not normal. Not normal." The words hung in the air like smoke, choking off whatever hope I'd held for a reasonable conversation. "What's not normal?" I said, feeling something fierce rise up in my chest, "is the way this family has treated Thomas's memory. What's not normal is how quickly everyone seemed to forget he existed the moment he became inconvenient." The silence that followed was arctic. Derek excused himself to check on something in the kitchen. Sandra's face went pale, then flushed with anger. "How dare you?" she said in a voice I'd never heard from her before. "How dare you suggest we didn't love Dad? We all mourned in our own ways." "Your own ways," I repeated. "When was the last time any of you visited his grave? When was the last time Michael or Patricia even asked how I was doing? When was the last time anyone in this family treated me like I was more than just a free babysitter and emergency bank account?" The words tumbled out before I could stop them, years of suppressed resentment finally finding voice. It felt dangerous and liberating and terrifying all at once. Sandra's boyfriend Derek reappeared in the doorway, clearly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding in his pristine dining room. "Maybe I should take Lily to her room," he suggested diplomatically. But Lily, who had been quietly coloring at the table throughout this exchange, looked up with those serious dark eyes that reminded me so much of Thomas. "I want to stay with Grandma," she said simply. "I want to keep visiting Grandpa. He needs to know we didn't forget him." Out of the mouths of babes, this 9-year-old child understood something about loyalty and love that seemed to escape the adults around her. Sandra's reaction was swift and decisive. "That's exactly what I'm talking about, Mom. You're filling her head with fantasies. You're making this harder for everyone." "I'm helping her grieve," I said. "I'm showing her that love doesn't end just because someone dies. I'm teaching her that the people we love deserve to be remembered and honored, not forgotten the moment they become inconvenient." The argument escalated from there, voices raised in Derek's carefully decorated dining room, while Lily sat wide-eyed and quiet, absorbing yet another adult conversation that would shape her understanding of how families work, how love operates, how people treat each other when grief and money and convenience collide. By the time we left Sandra's apartment that evening, battle lines had been drawn. Lily would continue staying with me during the week while Sandra worked, but weekend visits to the cemetery were now forbidden. Family gatherings would be limited and supervised. My role in Lily's life was being systematically reduced, reframed as potentially harmful rather than loving. The ride home on the subway was quiet. Lily pressed against my side, her small hand holding mine as we swayed with the motion of the train through the tunnels beneath Manhattan. "Grandma," she said as we climbed the stairs to our apartment building, "are we in trouble? How do you explain to a child that sometimes loving someone gets you labeled as the problem? How do you help them understand that adults don't always make decisions based on what's best for everyone involved?" "We're not in trouble, sweetheart," I said, unlocking our door and stepping into the familiar warmth of our small home. "Sometimes adults disagree about things, but you and I, we know what's right in our hearts." That night, as I tucked Lily into the small bed we'd set up in what used to be Thomas's study, she asked me the question I'd been dreading. "Grandma, what if Grandpa really can't hear me when I knock on his coffin? What if I've been talking to nobody this whole time?" I sat on the edge of her bed, looking at this wise little girl who was grappling with concepts that challenge philosophers and theologians. How do you balance honesty with hope? How do you acknowledge doubt while preserving faith? "What do you think?" I asked her. "When you knock on Grandpa's resting place and tell him about your day, how does it make you feel?" She considered this seriously, the way she approached all important questions. "It makes me feel like he's still part of our family," she said finally. "Like he's still taking care of us, just in a different way. And it makes me feel better when I'm sad." "Then it doesn't matter what anyone else thinks," I told her. "If it brings you comfort and helps you remember how much Grandpa loved you, then it's exactly what you should be doing." But even as I spoke these words of encouragement to my granddaughter, I was beginning to question everything about my place in this family. The argument with Sandra had crystallized something I'd been trying to ignore, the growing sense that my children saw me as an obstacle rather than an asset, a burden rather than a blessing. The signs had been there for months, maybe even years. The phone calls that grew shorter and less frequent, the family gatherings I wasn't invited to until the last minute, if at all, the way conversations stopped when I entered a room, as if I'd interrupted something private and important. My 75th birthday had passed in March with minimal fanfare. A card from Patricia with a generic message about hoping my day was special. A quick phone call from Michael between his son's soccer practice and a business dinner. Sandra had taken Lily and me to a modest restaurant in the Bronx, but it felt obligatory rather than celebratory, like checking an item off a to-do list. The contrast with how we used to celebrate birthdays, elaborate homemade cakes, surprise parties, thoughtful gifts chosen with care and attention, was stark and heartbreaking. But I'd told myself it was just because everyone was busy, because adult children have their own lives to manage, because expectations needed to adjust to new realities. Now I was beginning to understand that the distance wasn't circumstantial. It was intentional. The realization hit me fully 2 weeks after the dinner at Sandra's apartment. I had been battling a persistent cough and fever for several days, the kind of illness that would have had me rushing to the doctor if it had been affecting Thomas or Lily. But for myself, I'd been trying to treat it with over-the-counter medications and rest, not wanting to spend money on a doctor's visit that might not be covered by Medicare. When the fever spiked to almost 102 degrees, I finally called Sandra to ask if she might be able to take Lily for the day while I went to the urgent care clinic. "Mom, this really isn't a good time," Sandra said when she answered her phone. "Derek and I have plans today, and honestly, you probably just have a cold. Maybe take some aspirin and drink plenty of fluids." A cold. As if my decades as a registered nurse hadn't taught me the difference between a cold and something requiring medical attention. "Sandra, I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important. My fever is over 102 and I'm having trouble breathing. I just need someone to watch Lily for a few hours while I get checked out." There was a pause, the kind of silence that speaks volumes about priorities and relationships. "Can't Michael help? Or Patricia?" Always deflecting. Always suggesting someone else should handle the inconvenience of my needs. I called Michael next. His phone went straight to voicemail. I called Patricia, who answered but explained she was in the middle of a busy shift at the restaurant where she worked as a server. "Mom, can't this wait until tomorrow? I really can't leave work right now." In the end, it was Mrs. Rodriguez from down the hall who came to my rescue. This 70-year-old Puerto Rican woman, who barely knew me, offered to watch Lily while I sought medical attention, bringing homemade soup and stories of her own experiences navigating American healthcare as an elderly immigrant. "Mija," she said in her gentle, accented English, "family isn't just about blood. Sometimes the people who care for you most are the ones life puts in your path when you need them." Her words stayed with me during the long wait at the clinic, through the chest x-rays that confirmed I had walking pneumonia, through the prescription for antibiotics that cost $43 I hadn't budgeted for that month. When I returned home late that afternoon, exhausted and medicated, I found Mrs. Rodriguez and Lily had become fast friends. They were sitting at my small kitchen table, working on a puzzle together while something delicious-smelling simmered on the stove. "Grandma," Lily jumped up to hug me. "Mrs. Rodriguez taught me how to make sofrito, and she told me stories about when she was a little girl in Puerto Rico." The warmth in my apartment, both literal and emotional, was a sharp contrast to the cold reception I'd received from my own family during a health crisis. That night, after Mrs. Rodriguez had gone back to her own apartment and Lily was asleep, I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and faced a truth I'd been avoiding for too long. My adult children saw me as a resource, not a person. They valued what I could provide, childcare, financial help, emotional labor, but not who I was as an individual with my own needs, fears, and limitations. When I became inconvenient, when I needed support rather than offering it, I became someone to be managed rather than cared for. The pneumonia had been a test I hadn't even realized I was taking, and my family had failed it spectacularly. But the most devastating blow was still to come. 3 days later, as I was beginning to recover from the worst of my illness, Sandra called with news that would shatter whatever illusions I still harbored about family loyalty and financial fairness. "Mom, I need to talk to you about Dad's truck." Thomas's 1997 Ford pickup truck was parked in the small lot behind our apartment building, covered by a tarp and gathering dust. It wasn't worth much in terms of dollars, maybe $3,000 or $4,000 if we found the right buyer, but it was worth everything in terms of memories. That truck had taken us on weekend trips to the Jersey Shore when the children were young. It had moved furniture for Sandra's first apartment, helped Michael transport supplies for his construction jobs, carried Christmas trees and birthday cakes and hope through decades of modest dreams. Thomas had taught both Michael and Sandra to drive in that truck. He'd spent countless weekend hours under the hood, maintaining it with the same careful attention he brought to his subway maintenance work. It smelled like his aftershave and coffee and hard work, and sometimes I would sit in the driver's seat just to feel close to him again. "What about the truck?" I asked, though something cold was already forming in my stomach. "Well, Michael and I have been talking, and we think it would be best if we sold it. Dad doesn't need it anymore, and honestly, you don't drive much these days. It's just taking up space and probably costing money for insurance and registration fees." The casual way she discussed disposing of Thomas's most treasured possession, his symbol of independence and provider status, made me feel sick. "Sandra, that truck, it has so many memories. I'm not ready to sell it yet. Mom, be practical. It's just sitting there deteriorating. Michael knows someone who would give us a fair price, and we could use the money to help with Dad's remaining medical bills." Medical bills that had gone unpaid because I'd been stretching every dollar to cover basic living expenses and Lily's needs. Bills that my children knew I was struggling to manage on my fixed income. What do you mean we could use the money? I asked. Another pause. Another silence pregnant with uncomfortable truths. Well, Michael and I figured we'd split it 3 ways. Him, me, and Patricia. To help offset some of the expenses we've all incurred during Dad's illness. Expenses they'd incurred? As if driving Thomas to doctor appointments constituted a major financial burden. As if the occasional hospital visit had somehow cost them thousands of dollars. As if I hadn't been the one paying for medications, co-pays, medical equipment, and everything else associated with his care. Sandra, that truck legally belongs to me now. It was part of the estate, and as Thomas's surviving spouse, his assets became mine. Mom, don't make this more complicated than it needs to be. It's just an old truck. We're family. We should share these things. Share. A word that apparently only applied when they wanted something from me, not when I needed support from them. But the conversation had revealed something even more disturbing than their casual dismissal of my legal ownership. They had already made plans to sell the truck. They had already contacted a potential buyer. They were informing me of their decision, not asking for my permission. Are you telling me you've already arranged to sell Thomas's truck without consulting me? The silence that followed was answer enough. Michael has a friend who's interested, Sandra finally admitted. We thought it would be easier if we just handled the details. You've been so stressed lately with Dad's death and everything. Stressed. As if grief was a temporary inconvenience that rendered me incompetent to make decisions about my own property. Sandra, I want you to listen to me very carefully, I said, feeling something shift inside my chest like a tectonic plate movement. That truck belonged to your father, and now it belongs to me. If and when I decide to sell it, I will make that decision. Do you understand? Mom, you're being unreasonable. It's not like you're ever going to drive it again. That's not the point, I said. The point is that it's mine to decide what happens to it, just like it's my decision whether to keep visiting your father's grave, just like it's my decision how to spend my own money and time. I hung up the phone with shaking hands, my heart pounding with a mixture of rage and grief, and something I hadn't felt in years, the fierce protective instinct of someone who had finally reached her limit. That night, I barely slept. I kept thinking about the truck sitting in the parking lot, about Thomas's hands on the steering wheel, about all the ways my children had reduced his memory to a financial transaction. But more than that, I kept thinking about patterns. The long history of my needs being dismissed, my opinions being overruled, my role being minimized to whatever function they currently required. The next morning, I did something I hadn't done in months. I got dressed in my best clothes, a navy blue dress that Thomas had always said brought out the color of my eyes, and I walked to the small community legal aid office that Mrs. Rodriguez had mentioned during one of our conversations. The young lawyer who met with me, Jennifer Martinez, was probably around Sandra's age but treated me with a respect and attention I hadn't experienced from my own family in years. Mrs. Chen, she said after I'd explained the situation with the truck and outlined the broader pattern of financial and emotional manipulation I'd been experiencing, what you're describing sounds like elder abuse. It may not be physical, but emotional manipulation and financial exploitation are serious issues that affect many seniors. Elder abuse. The words hit me like cold water. I had been thinking of my family's behavior as hurtful, disappointing, unfair, but giving it a clinical name, categorizing it as a form of abuse, forced me to confront just how far things had deteriorated. I don't want to cause trouble, I said, the old reflexive response that had kept me accepting unacceptable behavior for so long. They're my children. They don't mean any harm. Jennifer looked at me with kind but serious eyes. Mrs. Chen, intent doesn't always matter when we're talking about harm. If their actions are causing you emotional distress and financial hardship, if they're making decisions about your property without your consent, if they're isolating you from activities and relationships that bring you comfort, those behaviors have an impact regardless of their intentions. She helped me understand my rights regarding Thomas's estate, my legal ownership of the truck, my authority to make decisions about my own life and property. She also gave me information about resources for seniors dealing with family conflicts, support groups, financial counseling services. Walking home from that appointment, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. The sense of having an advocate, someone in my corner who saw my perspective as valid rather than inconvenient. But I also felt the weight of approaching confrontation. Standing up for myself would have consequences. It would force conversations that had been avoided, reveal truths that had been carefully obscured, challenge a family dynamic that worked well for everyone except me. The showdown came sooner than expected. 2 days after my meeting with the legal aid lawyer, Michael showed up at my apartment with a man I'd never met before. Presumably his friend who was interested in buying Thomas's truck. "Mom, this is Dave," Michael said, as if it was perfectly normal to bring a stranger to evaluate my husband's vehicle without my permission. "He's going to take a look at Dad's truck and give us an estimate." The presumption was breathtaking. Not only had Michael ignored my explicit statement about not being ready to sell the truck, he had actually arranged for a buyer to come inspect it. "Michael," I said, blocking the doorway to prevent them from entering my apartment, "I told Sandra I wasn't ready to sell your father's truck. That conversation apparently didn't reach you." "Mom, come on. Don't make this difficult. Dave drove all the way here from Queens. The least we can do is let him take a look." "No," I said, the word coming out stronger and clearer than I'd expected. "I said I wasn't ready to sell, and I meant it. I don't know who gave you the impression that my decisions about my own property were subject to family committee approval, but you were misinformed." Dave, to his credit, looked uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding in front of him. "Listen, maybe I should come back another time when you folks have had a chance to sort this out." "That won't be necessary," I said. "When and if I decide to sell my husband's truck, I'll find my own buyer and handle my own negotiations." Michael's face flushed red with anger and embarrassment. "Mom, you're being ridiculous. It's just a truck. Dad doesn't need it anymore, and you don't drive much. Why are you making this into such a big deal?" "Because it's not about the truck, Michael. It's about respect. It's about the fact that you and your sisters have been making decisions about my life without consulting me. It's about the way this family treats me like I'm incompetent or irrelevant whenever I have something you want or whenever I become inconvenient." The words poured out of me like water through a broken dam, months of suppressed frustration and hurt finally finding voice. "You want to know what the big deal is? The big deal is that none of you called to check on me when I had pneumonia last week. The big deal is that you've tried to limit my time with Lily because my way of helping her grieve doesn't match your professional opinions. The big deal is that you see me as a resource to be managed rather than a person to be loved." Michael stared at me like I'd grown a second head. In his experience, I was the woman who said yes, who accommodated, who absorbed family problems without complaint. This version of me, the one setting boundaries and demanding respect, was unfamiliar territory. "Mom, we don't think of you that way." "Don't you?" I asked. "When was the last time anyone in this family asked me how I was doing without following it up with a request for money or babysitting? When was the last time anyone considered what I might need or want before deciding what was best for me?" Dave excused himself, clearly recognizing that this conversation had moved far beyond truck sales into deeper family territory. After he left, Michael and I stood in my doorway facing each other across decades of accumulated misunderstandings and unspoken resentments. "I know you've been through a lot with Dad dying," Michael said, his voice softer now but still carrying the undertone of someone who believed he was being patient with an unreasonable person. "Maybe you're not thinking clearly right now." "Not thinking clearly." The same dismissive phrase Sandra had used when she wanted to make funeral decisions without my input. "Michael, I want you to leave now," I said. "I want you to go home and think about how you've been treating me since your father died. And when you're ready to have a conversation that starts with respect instead of assumptions about my mental capacity, you can call me." He left, but not before delivering one final shot designed to make me question my own perceptions. "I hope you realize you're pushing away the people who love you," he said. "Dad wouldn't want you to be alone." Alone. The threat that had kept me compliant for so long. The fear that standing up for myself would result in complete isolation from my family. But as I closed the door behind him and turned to face my quiet apartment, I realized something profound had shifted. I would rather be alone and respected than surrounded by people who treated me like a convenient appliance. That evening, as I sat with Lily helping her with homework at our small kitchen table, she asked me about the visitors who had come earlier. "Grandma, why was Uncle Michael upset when he left? How do you explain adult family dynamics to a 9-year-old? How do you help a child understand conflict without forcing them to take sides or lose faith in the people they love?" "Uncle Michael and I had a disagreement about Grandpa's truck," I said carefully. "Sometimes adults see things differently, and we need to talk about those differences." "Are you going to sell Grandpa's truck?" The question pierced my heart because it reminded me who would be most affected by that decision. Lily loved that truck almost as much as Thomas had. She had spent countless hours sitting in the passenger seat while he checked the oil, learned to identify different tools from the glove compartment, listened to him explain how engines work with the patient enthusiasm of a grandfather teaching his favorite pupil. "I don't know yet, sweetheart. What do you think I should do?" She considered this with the seriousness she brought to all important questions. "I think Grandpa would want us to keep it for now," she said. "Maybe when I'm older I could learn to drive it and it would be like he's still teaching me things." out of the mouths of babes. This 9-year-old understood something about legacy and memory that the adults in our family had forgotten, that some things are worth more than their dollars and cents value. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I called Jennifer Martinez, the legal aid lawyer, and asked her to help me establish clear legal boundaries around my property and finances. I wanted documentation that the truck was mine, that my apartment lease was in my name alone, that any future decisions about selling assets or handling money would be mine to make. But more importantly, I asked her about my rights as Lily's grandmother and primary caregiver during the days when Sandra worked. Mrs. Chen, Jennifer explained, grandparents' rights vary by state, but in New York, you may have legal standing to request visitation or even partial custody if you can demonstrate that it's in the child's best interest and that you've been a primary caregiver. A primary caregiver. Someone who provided daily care, emotional support, and stability. Someone whose relationship with the child was essential to their well-being. For the first time in months, I felt like I had some power in a situation that had seemed hopeless. The next few weeks brought a Cold War atmosphere to family relationships. Sandra stopped calling as frequently. Michael's text messages became terse and formal. Patricia, who had always been the family peacemaker, tried unsuccessfully to mediate between us with phone calls that left everyone more frustrated than before. "Mom, I understand you're upset," Patricia said during one of these awkward conversations, "but you have to see this from their perspective too. Everyone is still grieving Dad, and maybe some poor decisions got made, but fighting about money and trucks isn't going to bring him back." Fighting about money and trucks. As if my need for respect and autonomy was petty materialism rather than basic human dignity. But the person I was most worried about throughout this family crisis was Lily. Children are sensitive to adult tension, and she had already endured the trauma of losing her grandfather. Now she was watching the adults in her life engage in conflicts she didn't fully understand, but undoubtedly felt the impact of. "Grandma," she said one evening as I was braiding her hair before bed, "are you and Mommy mad at each other?" "We're having some disagreements right now," I said carefully, "but that doesn't change how much we both love you." "Is it because I want to keep visiting Grandpa's grave? Because I can stop if that would make everyone happy again?" The offer broke my heart. This wise, caring little girl was willing to sacrifice her own need to grieve in order to restore peace to our fractured family. "Sweetheart, you never need to stop doing something that brings you comfort, just to make other people happy. Your feelings about Grandpa are important, and the way you choose to remember him is beautiful. But what if Mommy says I can't come stay with you anymore?" The fear in her voice revealed that she had been listening to adult conversations, picking up on threats and ultimatums that shouldn't have been burdening a child's mind. "Then we'll figure out a way to make sure we can still spend time together," I promised. "Because you and I are family, and family finds ways to take care of each other. Family finds ways to take care of each other." The words felt like a prayer, a statement of faith in what family could be, rather than what mine had become. The crisis reached its peak on a Sunday in early fall, during what was supposed to be a family meeting to resolve our differences and move forward. Sandra had organized the gathering at her apartment, inviting Michael, Patricia, and me for what she described as a clearing the air session. I arrived prepared for battle, armed with the legal documents Jennifer had helped me prepare, and a clarity about my own worth that had been years in the making. The apartment still gleamed with expensive furnishings and tasteful art, still spoke of financial success and comfortable living. But now, instead of feeling envious, I felt sad for the contrast between material wealth and emotional poverty. "Mom," Sandra began as we sat around her polished dining table, "we want you to know that we love you. But lately, you've been making decisions that seem designed to create conflict rather than preserve family unity." Family unity. A phrase that apparently meant everyone going along with whatever Sandra and Michael decided was best. "I've been making decisions designed to preserve my dignity," I replied. "If that creates conflict, maybe we need to examine why respecting my autonomy is threatening to family unity." Michael leaned forward, adopting the patient tone he probably used with difficult clients in his construction business. "Mom, no one is trying to disrespect you, but you have to admit that some of your recent behavior has been unusual." Unusual. Another way of saying that my refusal to be a compliant doormat was aberrant behavior requiring correction. "What specifically has been unusual?" I asked. "Well, refusing to sell Dad's truck when it's just sitting there costing money," Patricia said. "Making Lily's grief more complicated by encouraging her fixation on the cemetery. Being hostile when we try to help you make practical decisions." I looked around the table at my 3 adult children, successful, educated, financially comfortable people who somehow couldn't understand why their mother might want input into decisions affecting her own life. "Let me ask you something," I said. When was the last time any of you asked me what I wanted before deciding what was best for me? The silence told me everything I needed to know. When was the last time anyone in this family considered that I might have feelings about selling Thomas's truck that go beyond practical concerns about insurance costs and parking spaces? More silence. When was the last time anyone thought that maybe, just maybe, helping Lily maintain her connection to her grandfather's memory was more important than rushing her through grief on a timeline that feels comfortable for adults? I could see them exchanging glances. The kind of looks that said they believed I was being unreasonable but didn't want to confront me directly. "Mom," Sandra said finally, "we're not trying to control your life. We're trying to help you make good decisions during a difficult time." "Help me make good decisions," I repeated. "By deciding to sell my property without consulting me. By limiting my time with my granddaughter because you disagree with how I'm helping her cope with loss. By treating my independently managed private life as a family committee decision." "It's not like that," Michael protested. "Isn't it?" I asked. Michael described to me how bringing a potential buyer to evaluate my truck without my permission was helping me make a good decision. He couldn't answer because there was no answer that didn't reveal the truth, that they had decided what should happen and expected me to comply. "Sandra, explain to me how taking Lily away from the grandmother she turns to for comfort about her grandfather's death is in her best interest." Again, no answer that wouldn't expose the reality that their decisions were based on their convenience, not her well-being. "Patricia, tell me how excluding me from family gatherings and treating me like a burden rather than a beloved mother is preserving family unity." The silence stretched until it became uncomfortable for everyone. Finally, Sandra played the card I'd been expecting, the ultimate threat designed to bring me back into line. "Mom, if you keep creating this drama, we're going to have to reconsider Lily's living arrangements. Derek and I have been discussing it, and we think it might be better if she stayed with us full-time rather than spending so much time in an environment where there's constant conflict." There it was. The nuclear option. Take away my granddaughter, the light of my life, the person who made every sacrifice worthwhile, unless I surrendered my autonomy and accepted whatever treatment they chose to dish out. But something had changed in me over the past few months. The woman who would have crumbled under that threat, who would have apologized and capitulated to preserve access to Lily, was gone. In her place was someone who understood that accepting abuse to maintain relationships wasn't love. It was fear masquerading as devotion. "Sandra," I said, my voice steady and calm, "if you try to use Lily as a weapon against me, you will discover that grandparents have legal rights too. And you will discover that I am no longer the woman who accepts emotional blackmail in order to keep the peace." The shock on their faces was almost comical. They had expected surrender, not resistance. "Are you threatening to sue us?" Michael asked, his voice rising. "I'm promising to protect my relationship with my granddaughter, using whatever legal means necessary," I replied, "just as I'm protecting my right to make decisions about my own property and my own life." I stood up from the table, gathering my purse and jacket with movements that felt ceremonial, like a ritual marking the end of one phase of life and the beginning of another. "I want all of you to understand something," I said, looking at each of my children in turn. "I will no longer tolerate being treated like a convenient resource rather than a human being deserving of respect. I will no longer accept having my decisions overruled by people who think love gives them the right to control me. I will no longer buy affection by allowing myself to be exploited financially and emotionally." I paused at the door, turning back for one final statement that would define the new terms of our relationship. "When you're ready to treat me like an equal member of this family rather than a problematic dependent, you know how to reach me. Until then, I'll be busy living my life according to my own values and priorities." I left Sandra's apartment and rode the subway back to the Bronx with a mixture of terror and exhilaration coursing through my veins. I had finally done it. Finally stood up for myself in a way that left no room for misinterpretation or manipulation. But I had also potentially lost my family in the process. That night, as I sat in my quiet apartment drinking tea and looking at photos of happier times, I wondered if I had made a terrible mistake. Was standing up for myself worth the risk of losing contact with my children and granddaughter? Was dignity worth potential isolation? The answer came to me as I was getting ready for bed, in the form of my own reflection in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back at me had tears in her eyes, but she also had something I hadn't seen in years. Self-respect, pride, the kind of strength that comes from finally refusing to accept unacceptable treatment. I had spent so many years being afraid of losing my family that I had lost myself instead. Now, for the first time in decades, I was choosing to value my own worth as much as I valued their approval. The next few days were quiet. No phone calls from my children. No text messages. No requests for babysitting or emergency loans or emotional support. For the first time in years, I was completely free of their demands and expectations. And surprisingly, that freedom felt incredible. I woke up each morning without the weight of wondering what crisis I'd be asked to solve, what sacrifice I'd be expected to make, what part of myself I'd need to diminish in order to keep the peace. I spent my days reading books I'd been too busy to enjoy, taking walks around the neighborhood without rushing to meet someone else's schedule, having long conversations with Mrs. Rodriguez about life and resilience and the courage it takes to start over at any age. But I missed Lily desperately. She was the innocent victim in this family drama, and not seeing her felt like punishment for a crime I didn't commit. So I was both thrilled and terrified when Sandra called exactly 1 week after our confrontation. "Mom," she said without preamble, "Lily is asking for you. She wants to know why you haven't been coming around." My heart broke thinking about Lily wondering where I had gone, worrying that she had somehow caused the adults in her life to disappear from each other's worlds. "What have you told her?" I asked. "That we're having some grown-up disagreements and need time to work them out. And how is she handling that?" There was a pause before Sandra answered, and in that silence, I heard admission of something she didn't want to acknowledge. "She's having trouble sleeping. She keeps asking when she can visit Grandpa's grave again. Yesterday, she asked me if you stopped loving her because she got in trouble at school last week." It was emotional manipulation, but it was also genuine concern for Lily's well-being. Sandra might be using her daughter's distress as leverage, but that distress was real and heartbreaking. "I would never stop loving Lily," I said. "She is the most precious thing in my life, and nothing that happens between adults will ever change that." "Then maybe we need to find a way to work things out." Work things out. The phrase could mean genuine compromise and mutual respect, or it could mean finding a way to get me back into my old compliant role without addressing any of the underlying issues. "Sandra, I'm willing to have that conversation, but it has to start with acknowledgement that I have the right to make decisions about my own life. It has to include respect for my relationship with Lily and my role in helping her cope with her grandfather's death. And it has to involve treating me like an equal member of this family rather than a problem to be managed." Another pause while she considered whether she was ready to accept those terms. "Can you come over for dinner Sunday? Derek will be out of town, so it will just be me and Lily and you. We can talk." It felt like a small step toward reconciliation, but I had learned not to assume good intentions without clear evidence. "I'll come for dinner," I said. "But I want you to understand that I'm not coming to negotiate my basic rights as a human being. I'm coming to discuss how we move forward with mutual respect." That Sunday dinner would prove to be a turning point, but not at all in the way I expected. I arrived at Sandra's apartment with a small gift for Lily, a new sketchpad and colored pencils for the artwork she loved to create for Thomas's grave, and a guarded heart. Lily ran to me the moment I walked in, throwing her arms around my waist with the pure joy of a child who had missed someone important. "Grandma, I missed you so much. Mommy said you were busy, but I was worried you forgot about me." "I could never forget about you, sweetheart," I said, holding her tight and breathing in the familiar smell of her strawberry shampoo. "I've been thinking about you every day." Dinner started pleasantly enough. Sandra had made effort. Pot roast with vegetables, fresh rolls, even a small chocolate cake for dessert. Lily chattered happily about school, her friends, a book she was reading about horses. For a few hours, it almost felt like the family gatherings I remembered from better times. But after Lily went to her room to play with her new art supplies, Sandra's demeanor changed. "Mom, I'll get straight to the point," she said as we cleared dishes from the table. "I've been thinking about our conversation last week, and I need to understand something. What exactly do you want from us?" What did I want? After decades of giving everything and receiving minimal consideration in return, what did I actually want? "I want to be treated with respect," I said. "I want my opinions to matter when decisions are being made that affect me. I want my relationship with Lily to be valued rather than seen as problematic. I want to be seen as a person with my own needs and feelings, not just a resource for everyone else's convenience." "Okay," Sandra said, though her tone suggested she thought my requests were somehow unreasonable. "But you also have to understand that we're all adults here, and sometimes difficult decisions have to be made for practical reasons." "I understand that," I said. "What I don't understand is why those difficult decisions are always made without consulting me when they directly affect my life. Like the truck situation?" "Like the truck situation." She sat back in her chair, studying me with the same analytical expression she probably used in her job evaluating investment portfolios. "Mom, can I ask you something honestly? Do you really want to keep Dad's truck, or are you just trying to prove a point about having control?" The question caught me off guard because it forced me to examine my own motivations. Was I holding onto the truck because it genuinely mattered to me or because it had become a symbol in our power struggle? Both, I answered honestly. I want to keep the truck because it represents your father's independence and hard work, and because Lily loves it, and because I'm not ready to let go of that connection to him yet. But I also need you to understand that it's my decision to make, not yours. Even if keeping it doesn't make practical sense? Even then, Sandra, you make investment decisions about your stock portfolio that other people might think are impractical. You spend money on art and restaurant meals and vacations that someone else might consider wasteful. But nobody questions your right to make those choices because you're an independent adult with your own values and priorities. That's different, Mom. We're financially stable. We can afford to make impractical choices sometimes. And I can afford to keep a truck that costs me maybe $50 a month in insurance, even if it means eating less expensive groceries or skipping a few discretionary purchases. The point isn't whether you think it's a good financial decision. The point is that it's my decision to make. I could see her struggling with the concept that her elderly mother might have the same right to autonomy that she took for granted in her own life. But what if you make a bad decision? What if you hurt yourself financially or emotionally by holding on to things you should let go of? Then I'll learn from the consequences, just like any other adult, I said. Sandra, you've made mistakes in your life. We all have. Did you want me stepping in to override your decisions because I thought I knew better? That's not the same thing. Why not? She couldn't answer because there was no answer that didn't boil down to ageism. The assumption that reaching 75 somehow disqualified me from self-determination. But then she said something that revealed the deeper fear behind her need to control my choices. Because you're all I have left of Dad, and I can't stand watching you make yourself miserable by refusing to accept that he's gone. The raw emotion in her voice caught me completely off guard. For the first time in our recent conflicts, I heard genuine pain, rather than manipulation. Sandra, I said gently, keeping your father's truck doesn't mean I'm refusing to accept that he's gone. It means I'm choosing how to honor his memory in a way that feels right to me, just like visiting his grave with Lily is our way of staying connected to the love he gave us. But Dr. Martinez says, Dr. Martinez is a child psychologist who doesn't know Lily the way I do, I interrupted. She's never seen Lily's face light up when she tells Thomas about her school day. She's never witnessed the comfort Lily gets from feeling like he's still part of our family. She's making recommendations based on textbook theories about grief, not on understanding what actually helps this particular child. Sandra looked exhausted suddenly, like she'd been carrying a weight I hadn't fully recognized. I just want to do the right thing for Lily, she said. And I want to do right by you too, Mom. But sometimes I feel like I can't win. If I try to help you move on from Dad's death, you think I'm being disrespectful. If I let you hold on to everything, I'm worried you'll never heal. For the first time since our conflicts began, I could see Sandra's perspective clearly. She wasn't just trying to control me for her own convenience. She was genuinely worried about my well-being, even if her methods of showing that concern were misguided. Sweetheart, I said, reaching across the table to take her hand, grief doesn't follow a timeline. Healing doesn't look the same for everyone. What I need right now is the freedom to figure out my own path forward, with the support of my family rather than their intervention. But what if your path forward isn't healthy? Then trust me to recognize that and make adjustments, just like you'd want me to trust your judgment about your own life. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us processing this shift from argument to actual communication. I miss him too, Mom, Sandra said finally. I miss calling him when I have car trouble. I miss his terrible jokes at family dinners. I miss feeling like I had a father who would always think I was amazing, no matter how many mistakes I made. He did think you were amazing, I said. All of you. Even when he was worried about your choices or frustrated with your behavior, he was proud of the adults you became. I know, but sometimes I feel like I failed him by not being here more during his final months. I feel guilty for being so busy with work and Derek and Lily's schedule that I didn't spend more time with him when he was sick. And there it was, the guilt that had been driving so much of her recent behavior. Sandra wasn't just trying to control my grief. She was trying to manage her own regret. Sandra, your father didn't expect you to put your entire life on hold during his illness. He was proud of your career success. He loved Derek because Derek made you happy. He adored watching you be a good mother to Lily. But I should have done more. We all could have done more, I said. That's part of grief, wishing we'd had more time, more words, more chances to show love. But guilt isn't going to bring him back, and it's not going to honor his memory. As we continued talking, I realized that Sandra and I had been fighting about the wrong things. The truck, the cemetery visits, the family dynamics. Those were all symptoms of deeper pain and fear and unresolved grief. What if we tried a different approach? I suggested. What if instead of arguing about how to handle Dad's death, we focused on how to help each other heal? What would that look like? It would look like you trusting me to know what I need in terms of keeping his memory alive, and me being more open about sharing my grief process with you instead of just defending it. And Lily? It would look like both of us prioritizing what actually helps Lily, rather than what makes us feel like we're handling her grief correctly. Sandra nodded slowly, and I could see her considering this possibility. But then Lily appeared in the doorway, holding one of her new colored pencils and looking troubled. Mommy, Grandma, are you arguing again? The concern in her voice reminded us both of what was really at stake in our relationship, not our adult pride or our competing theories about grief, but the well-being of a 9-year-old girl who had already lost too much. We're not arguing, sweetheart, I said. We're talking about how to do better at being a family. Does that mean I can come stay with you again during the week? And visit Grandpa's grave on Sundays? Sandra looked at me, and in that moment I saw her make a decision to prioritize Lily's needs over her own discomfort with our unconventional approach to mourning. Yes, she said. You can stay with Grandma during the week, and you can visit Grandpa whenever you need to. The relief on Lily's face was worth every moment of conflict we'd endured to reach this point. Later that evening, as I was getting ready to leave, Sandra walked me to the door. Mom, I want to apologize for the way I handled the truck situation, and for trying to limit your time with Lily. I was so worried about doing the right thing that I forgot to consider what you actually needed. I appreciate that, I said. And I want to apologize for not being more patient with your concerns. Losing Thomas has been hard on all of us, and we've all been figuring out how to cope. Can we try to do better going forward? I think we can, I said. But Sandra, I need you to understand that doing better doesn't mean going back to the way things used to be. It means building something new based on mutual respect and honest communication. She hugged me goodbye. And for the first time in months, it felt like a genuine embrace rather than a polite obligation. Riding the subway home that night, I reflected on the conversation with Sandra and realized that something fundamental had shifted. I had stood my ground without losing my compassion. I had demanded respect without destroying relationship. Most importantly, I had learned that sometimes the people we love need us to set boundaries precisely because we love them, not in spite of it. But the real test of our family's new dynamic was still to come. 3 days later, Michael called. Mom, I heard you and Sandra worked things out, he said, his voice carefully neutral. We had a good conversation, I said. We're both committed to doing better at communicating and respecting each other's perspectives. That's good. That's really good. There was a pause then. About Dad's truck. I owe you an apology. I should never have brought Dave over without asking you first. That was out of line. The apology surprised me because Michael had always been the most stubborn of my children, the least likely to admit when he was wrong. I appreciate you saying that, I said. I was thinking, maybe instead of selling it, I could help you maintain it. Change the oil, check the tires, that sort of thing. It's what Dad would have wanted. The offer touched me because it represented a shift from seeing the truck as a financial burden to be eliminated to seeing it as a family treasure to be preserved. I'd like that very much, I said. And Mom, about the way I've been treating you lately. Patricia helped me see that I've been acting like you couldn't handle your own affairs. That wasn't fair. And I'm sorry. Patricia, the peacemaker who had apparently been working behind the scenes to help her siblings understand what I'd been trying to tell them. Michael, we've all been struggling with how to adjust to life without your father. I don't think any of us handled it perfectly. Maybe not. But I should have been more supportive instead of more controlling. It was the closest thing to a complete apology I'd ever received from Michael, and it felt like another piece of our fractured family clicking back into place. But even as relationships with my children began to heal, I knew that the real changes weren't just about their treatment of me. They were about my own transformation, the slow, sometimes painful process of rediscovering who I was beyond my roles as wife, mother, and grandmother. For the first time in decades, I was making decisions based on what brought me joy rather than what was expected of me. I started volunteering again at a local literacy program, helping adult immigrants learn to read English. I joined a grief support group at the community center, where I met other widows navigating the complex process of rebuilding identity after loss. Most surprisingly, I began developing a genuine friendship with Mrs. Rodriguez, who turned out to have a rich history as a civil rights activist in her younger years, and fascinating stories about raising 5 children as a single mother in New York during the 1970s. You know what I learned, mija? She told me one afternoon as we sat in her apartment sharing café con leche and homemade pastries. Sometimes we have to lose ourselves completely before we can find who we really are. Her words resonated deeply because that's exactly what had happened to me. In the crucible of family conflict and grief, and standing up for myself, I had discovered strength I didn't know I possessed, and preferences I had never been free to explore. The change was most evident in my relationship with Lily. which deepened as I stopped trying to be the perfect grandmother and started being my authentic self. She began asking me questions about my own childhood, my dreams, my experiences as a young woman. She wanted to know about my nursing career, my early years of marriage with Thomas, the challenges I had faced and overcome. "Grandma, were you scared when you first came to New York?" she asked one Sunday as we sat beside Thomas's grave, sharing our weekly ritual of updating him on our lives. "Terrified," I admitted. I was 18 years old. I had never lived away from my parents, and the city seemed so big and loud and overwhelming. "But you stayed anyway?" "I stayed because I fell in love with your grandfather, and I fell in love with the possibility of building a life together." "Do you think Grandpa would be proud of us for learning to take care of ourselves?" The question revealed her growing understanding that our survival and healing were accomplishments worth celebrating. "I think he would be amazed at how strong and wise you've become," I said. "And I think he would be proud of both of us for finding ways to honor his memory while still living our own lives." These conversations with Lily became a source of healing for both of us, a way of processing grief while building new traditions and understanding between generations. But the most profound change was in my relationship with myself. For the first time since Thomas's death, maybe for the first time in decades, I was living according to my own values rather than trying to meet everyone else's expectations. I kept Thomas's truck, not as a symbol of defiance, but as a reminder of his independence and hard work. I continued taking Lily to the cemetery, not to defy Sandra's parenting choices, but because it genuinely helped both of us maintain our connection to someone we loved. I maintained boundaries with my children, not to punish them, but to preserve my own dignity and emotional health. 6 months after the confrontation at Sandra's apartment, something remarkable happened. Lily and I were at the cemetery for our usual Sunday visit when she knocked on Thomas's headstone with her familiar rhythm and said something she'd never said before. "Grandpa, I think you can stop worrying about us now. Grandma and I are learning to be okay without you here. We still miss you every day, but we're not scared anymore." I looked at this wise little girl who had somehow understood something that had taken me months to figure out, that healing doesn't mean forgetting, and that love continues even when physical presence ends. "What made you realize that, sweetheart?" I asked. She considered the question with her characteristic seriousness. "Because you're different now, Grandma. You're sad sometimes, but you're not scared anymore. And when people aren't scared, they can take better care of the people they love." Out of the mouths of babes. My 9-year-old granddaughter had just described the transformation I'd been struggling to put into words, the shift from fear-based compliance to love-based strength. That afternoon, as we were preparing to leave the cemetery, Lily made an announcement that surprised me. "Grandma, I think I don't need to knock on Grandpa's grave every week anymore." "Why?" I asked, wondering if Sandra had been pressuring her to give up the ritual. "Because I figured out how to talk to him without knocking," she said. "I can tell him things in my heart, and I know he hears me. And I can remember all the things he taught me, and it's like he's still helping me learn." It was a natural evolution of her grief process. Exactly the kind of healing that happens when children are allowed to work through loss at their own pace, rather than being pushed to move on according to adult timelines. "That sounds like a very grown-up way to stay connected to Grandpa," I said. "I learned it from watching you," she said. "You talk to him in your heart too, don't you?" She was right. Somewhere during the months of family conflict and personal growth, I had stopped needing external rituals to feel close to Thomas. His presence lived in my memories, in the values he had taught me, in the strength I drew from 47 years of shared love and partnership. But the most unexpected miracle was still to come. 2 weeks later, Michael called with news that would shock our entire family. "Mom, you need to sit down for this," he said. "Remember Dad's old friend Tony from the subway yard? The one who moved to Florida about 10 years ago?" "Of course I remember Tony. What about him?" "He called me yesterday with the most incredible story. Mom, he says that Dad left something for you, something nobody knew about." My heart started beating faster. Thomas had been meticulous about our finances, and I thought I knew about all his accounts, insurance policies, and possessions. "What kind of something?" "Tony says Dad had been buying lottery tickets every week for 20 years, the same numbers every time. He kept all the tickets in a safety deposit box that nobody knew about except Tony, who had a key in case something happened to Dad." Lottery tickets. Thomas had never mentioned playing the lottery, though he had always joked about what he'd do if we ever struck it rich. "Tony waited to check the box because he wanted to make sure all of Dad's affairs were settled first," Michael continued. "Mom, one of those tickets from 3 months ago." He paused, and I could hear him taking a deep breath. "Mom, Dad won the lottery. 3 months before he died, he won $2 million. The room seemed to tilt around me. $2 million. a fortune that could change everything. My financial security, my independence, my ability to help my family without sacrificing my own well-being. That's impossible, I whispered. I would have known. He would have told me. Tony thinks Dad wanted to surprise you but got sick before he could claim the prize. The ticket is still valid, but only for another few weeks. My hands were shaking as I tried to process this information. Thomas had won the lottery and died before he could share the news. He had left me not just love and memories, but financial independence beyond anything we had ever dreamed possible. Michael, are you absolutely certain this isn't some kind of mistake or misunderstanding? Tony is bringing all the documentation to a lawyer tomorrow. He wants to make sure everything is handled properly. But Mom, the numbers match. The date matches. Dad really did win. After I hung up the phone, I sat in my quiet apartment trying to comprehend what this discovery meant. The woman who had been struggling to afford groceries and prescription medications was suddenly wealthy beyond her wildest imagination. But more than the money itself, Thomas's lottery win felt like the ultimate validation of the choices I had made over the past year. I had fought for my dignity and autonomy when I thought I had nothing to lose except family relationships. Now I was being rewarded for that courage with resources that would make independence not just possible, but comfortable. The irony wasn't lost on me. My children had seen me as a financial burden, someone whose needs were inconvenient and whose wishes were impractical. Now I had the means to support myself completely, and still have enough left over to help them if I chose to. When I called Sandra to share the news, her reaction was everything I could have hoped for. Mom, this is incredible! Dad must have been planning to surprise you. Oh my God, you'll never have to worry about money again. Her genuine joy for my good fortune felt like another layer of healing in our relationship. But when I called to tell Lily, her response touched my heart in a completely different way. Grandma, does this mean Grandpa is still taking care of us from heaven? What do you think, sweetheart? I think he knew we were going to need help learning to be brave, so he left us a present to make it easier. A present to make it easier to be brave. My wise granddaughter had perfectly captured the miracle of timing in Thomas's gift. Over the next few weeks, as lawyers handled the process of claiming the lottery prize and managing the windfall, I thought carefully about how I wanted to use this unexpected blessing. The first thing I did was establish a trust fund for Lily's education, ensuring she would never have to choose between dreams and financial limitations. The second was to pay off the modest debts Thomas's illness had created: medical bills, prescription costs, the loan I'd taken against our retirement savings. But beyond the practical necessities, I made some choices that reflected my newfound commitment to living authentically, rather than just surviving. I kept our apartment in the Bronx, but I upgraded to a larger unit with better heating and more space for Lily during her stays with me. I bought a reliable car, not Thomas's truck, which I kept for sentimental reasons, but a modern vehicle that would make traveling to visit family and friends easier. Most importantly, I used some of the money to create opportunities for the kind of life I had always wanted, but never felt free to pursue. I enrolled in an art class at the local community college, something I had dreamed about for decades but had never been able to afford. I joined a travel group for seniors and took my first vacation in over 20 years, a week in Vermont during fall foliage season that restored my faith in beauty and adventure. I also began supporting causes that mattered to me: the literacy program where I volunteered, a scholarship fund for nursing students, local organizations serving elderly immigrants like Mrs. Rodriguez, who had become such an important part of my support network. "Hi, Margaret," Mrs. Rodriguez said when I told her about the lottery win. "You're Thomas. He is still working miracles from wherever he is now." But perhaps the most meaningful way I used Thomas's gift was to finally have the conversation I'd been avoiding with my children. Not about money or practical arrangements, but about love and legacy, and what kind of family we wanted to be going forward. I invited all three of my children and Lily to dinner at a restaurant nicer than any place we'd gathered before. As we sat around a table set with cloth napkins and real flowers, I shared not just the news about their father's lottery win, but my vision for how it could heal some of the wounds that had opened between us. "I want you all to know that this money doesn't change the boundaries I've established about respect and autonomy," I began. "But it does give us an opportunity to build the kind of family relationships we've all wanted but struggled to create." I looked around the table at these adults who were my children, these people I loved desperately but had been learning to love differently. "Michael, I want to help you start the contracting business you've been dreaming about. Not as a loan you have to pay back with interest and guilt, but as an investment in your future. Patricia, I know you've been wanting to go back to school to become a teacher. I'd like to pay for your education so you can pursue work that brings you joy instead of just covering bills. Sandra, I want to establish a college fund for Lily that means you never have to choose between your own financial security and her educational opportunities. But most of all, I continued, I want us to use this blessing to learn how to support each other without losing ourselves in the process. I want us to be generous without being controlling, loving without being possessive. The emotion around the table was palpable. These were gifts they had never expected, opportunities that would change their lives in fundamental ways. But Sandra's response revealed how much our family dynamic had truly shifted over the past year. Mom, that's incredibly generous. But I want to make sure you're keeping enough for yourself, for your own dreams, your own security, your own future. A year earlier, the conversation about my lottery winnings would have focused on how the money could solve their problems. Now my daughter was prioritizing my well-being and autonomy, the same way I was learning to prioritize theirs. I'm keeping plenty for myself, I assured her. For the first time in my adult life, I have the freedom to make choices based on what brings me joy, rather than just what's necessary for survival. Lily, who had been listening to this adult conversation with the serious attention she brought to all important family discussions, raised her hand like she was in school. Grandma, can I ask you something? Of course, sweetheart. Do you think all the fighting we did this year was worth it? Because now we have money to fix everything? The question revealed that she understood something crucial, that the changes in our family hadn't been caused by financial stress, and they wouldn't be solved by financial security. Lily, the money is wonderful, and it will make a lot of things easier for all of us, I said. But the most important changes in our family happened before we knew about Grandpa's lottery ticket. They happened when we all learned to be honest about what we needed from each other. What do you mean? I mean that money can solve some problems, but it can't make people treat each other with respect. It can make life more comfortable, but it can't create love or trust or understanding. As if to prove my point, the months that followed were the happiest our family had experienced in years. Not because we had become wealthy, but because we had learned to value each other as individuals, rather than just as sources of support or comfort. Sandra and I developed a new rhythm of shared responsibility for Lily that honored both my special relationship with my granddaughter and Sandra's authority as her mother. Michael began stopping by regularly to help maintain Thomas's truck, but our visits expanded to include conversations about his dreams, his fears, his hopes for the contracting business I was helping him start. Patricia used her tuition money to enroll in an education program, but more importantly, she began joining Lily and me for occasional cemetery visits, sharing her own memories of Thomas while supporting our continuing rituals of remembrance. The cemetery visits themselves evolved as Lily had predicted. We still went most Sundays, but the desperate quality of early grief had been replaced by peaceful reflection and gratitude. Lily brought Thomas school pictures and report cards instead of desperate pleas for him to return. I brought fresh flowers and stories about how his love continued to guide our family's growth. One Sunday in late spring, exactly 1 year after Thomas's death, Lily surprised me with an announcement. Grandma, I figured out what Grandpa's miracle really was. We were sitting beside his grave in the warm sunshine, watching other families tend to their own memorials of love and loss. What miracle is that, sweetheart? Not the lottery ticket, she said seriously. That was just money. The real miracle was that he taught us how to take care of each other even after he couldn't be here to show us anymore. I looked at this remarkable child who had somehow understood that the greatest inheritance isn't financial. It's the capacity for love that survives separation, the strength that develops through struggle, the wisdom that emerges from working through conflict instead of avoiding it. How do you think he did that? I asked. By loving us so much when he was alive that we couldn't forget how it felt, and by making sure we had everything we needed to learn how to be brave. Everything we needed to learn how to be brave. The phrase captured not just Thomas's lottery win, but his entire legacy, the way his love had given us the foundation for building lives of dignity and authenticity, even in his absence. As we prepared to leave the cemetery that day, I realized that Lily's assessment was exactly right. The miracle hadn't been the lottery ticket, though that had certainly made life easier. The miracle had been the transformation of our family, from a collection of people taking from each other to a group of individuals supporting each other's growth and autonomy. The miracle had been learning that love doesn't require sacrifice of self-respect, that boundaries can coexist with affection, that standing up for yourself can actually strengthen relationships rather than destroying them. The miracle had been discovering that at 75 years old, I was still capable of change, still worthy of respect, still deserving of a life lived according to my own values rather than everyone else's expectations. Now, as I sit in my comfortable apartment on this quiet evening, looking at photos that represent not just the past, but the future we're all building together, I can honestly say that grief taught me something I hadn't learned in 47 years of marriage, that the best way to honor someone's love is to use it as foundation for living authentically, not as excuse for diminishing yourself. Thomas's lottery ticket provided financial security, But the real prize was the courage I found to demand respect from the people I love most. His death forced us all to examine what family really means, and we discovered it's not about obligation or convenience or unquestioning sacrifice. It's about choosing to support each other's highest potential, while maintaining the boundaries necessary for individual dignity and growth. Lily visits me several times a week now, but she also has her own space with Sandra and Derek, her own friends and activities and dreams. We talk to Thomas together sometimes, sharing memories and questions and gratitude, but we also live fully in the present, building new traditions while honoring old ones. My children call regularly, but not to ask for money or favors. They call because they want to share their lives with me, to include me in their decisions, to benefit from wisdom I've gained through decades of experience and recent months of growth. Mrs. Rodriguez and I have become genuine friends, two elderly women who understand that it's never too late to discover new aspects of yourself, never too long to demand better treatment from the world around you. I go to sleep each night in my own space, surrounded by possessions I've chosen rather than settled for, secure in relationships based on mutual respect rather than desperate need or guilty obligation. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if Thomas hadn't left the lottery ticket. Would we have found our way to this healthier family dynamic without the financial security that made change feel less risky? I think we would have, because the most important transformations had already begun before we knew about the money. I had already stopped accepting unacceptable treatment. My children had already begun recognizing my autonomy. Lily had already started healing from grief in her own natural way. The lottery win just made it easier to make choices based on love rather than fear. So let me ask you, have you ever lived something like this story? Have you found yourself giving everything to family members who treated your generosity as obligation rather than gift? Have you watched your own needs become invisible while everyone else's became paramount? Tell me in the comments. Share your story of standing up for yourself, or fighting to maintain dignity in relationships that had become one-sided. And if this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to my channel, because sometimes the most important miracles aren't the ones that change our circumstances. They're the ones that change our understanding of what we deserve from the people we love. Every time someone shares a story like this, another person realizes they're not alone in struggling with these challenges. Another grandmother understands that setting boundaries doesn't make her selfish. Another family discovers that respect and love can coexist beautifully when everyone commits to honoring each other's dignity. The miracle isn't always a lottery ticket or a dramatic rescue or an external solution to our problems. Sometimes the miracle is simply recognizing our own worth and refusing to accept less than we deserve from the relationships that matter most. Sometimes the miracle is a 9-year-old girl knocking on her grandfather's coffin and somehow understanding that love continues even when physical presence ends, that strength can grow from loss, and that families can learn to take care of each other in ways that honor everyone's humanity. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for hearing not just the pain but the hope, not just the conflict but the resolution, not just the struggle but the transformation that proved to be worth every difficult moment. Because in the end, that's what miracles really are. Not magic that erases problems, but grace that helps us grow strong enough to solve them ourselves.